Bobbi Ann Campbell was a 24-year-old from Draper, Utah. She had a daughter, but also had given up a son for adoption, keeping in contact with his new family through letters. On December 27, 1994, Bobbi left her daughter with a friend so she could run some errands, including picking up her paycheck. She never came home. She was never seen again. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. There's a car rental company commercial out right now. It shows a father getting ready to go on a business trip. His little girl realizes that he is leaving, and she runs out of the room, sad that her dad will be gone for a few days. Then the father, seeing his daughter's reaction, changes his car rental reservation to include a car seat, so he can take his daughter along. Have you seen it? Now, I don't have any children. But I've been told that one of the toughest things a parent has to do is leave their child behind. Whether it's going on a business trip, like in the commercial, or parents who have left because they're in the military going to Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever, or even in those cases where the parents are divorced and they have to drop their child or children off due to the rules of the child support agreement. Seeing their child's sad face and the parent knowing that he or she is causing it is one of the most emotionally powerful experiences for a parent. Well, we have that situation today. Bobbi was the mother of a little girl who believed her mom would be back in about an hour. And this little girl sat by the window, staring out at the street, waiting to see her mother's car appear out front once again. But Bobbi never returned. Something happened out on the streets of the Salt Lake City area that day. And that little girl, now a woman, wonders what happened and why she was left behind. And now, summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Goodsite, charlieproject.org. Bobbi Campbell had a beautiful side to her. She was close to her great-grandparents. She and her 5-year-old daughter Stephanie were best friends. Bobbi also had a son, but she gave him up for adoption because she knew she wasn't emotionally or financially equipped to raise another child. Even so, she kept in touch with her son's new parents through several letters. But there was another side to Bobbi. She had been an addict for several years, and the belief is that she got into harder drugs not long before she disappeared. On December 27, 1994, a date most news outlets have gotten wrong over the years, Bobbi dropped Stephanie off with Bobbi's friend Jewel. The plan was for Bobbi to go out, get a few things including her paycheck, then return. Accounts differ, but Stephanie remembers her mother leaving with her boyfriend at the time. He lived right next to Jewel. Bobbi seemingly never ran any of her errands, and she never picked up her paycheck. She was never seen again. 8 months later, her car was finally found on a dead-end street in Salt Lake City. Everything was in it except for the keys. Nothing about the vehicle helped the police to determine what happened to Bobbi. The following issues have complicated finding a resolution to Bobbi's case. Number 1. Although Stephanie claims Bobbi left with the boyfriend, the police insist he did not. Number 2. There were no forensics done on Bobbi's car. In fact, no one is even sure how long it was on that street. Number 3. Bobbi's boyfriend, who was not an American citizen, returned to his home country within a year of Bobbi's disappearance and has never come back to the United States. And number 4, the recently discovered fact that Bobbi was actually married to another man, a person no one knew about, and not her boyfriend, when she disappeared. Bobbi's family rejects the idea that she just ran off. They suspect drugs and/or foul play are responsible for her disappearance. The guest for this episode is Bobbi's daughter, Stephanie Farrell. Unfound news. I've been struggling with some big-time sinus and throat issues this week. Luckily, I got the interview for this episode done before the illness set in. However, if you notice my voice isn't quite what it is for the rest of this episode, that's the reason. I apologize, really nothing I could do, but the podcast must go on. Next, as I've mentioned before, I'm trying to branch out and take on some other opportunities to spread the word about Unfound. I may have my first chance to speak at a college about podcasting and missing persons cases in the next few months. I hope it happens. I'll let you know if it does. Finally, I had another conversation with a TV person this week. The usual caveats apply, those being that the odds of getting a TV show made are very, very low. But he and I had a great talk, and the communication lines are open. This would be for some type of non-fiction program, by the way. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound is on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, iTunes, Podomatic, Stitcher, Podbean, and Spotify. Concerning Facebook, please join us on Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern for the Unfound live show on the Unfound page. And I also need to give a shout out to all the new followers on the Podomatic app. The email address, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. The website, unfoundpodcast.com. The website at Trib Total Media, triblive.com/news/unfound. Unfound has Patreon and PayPal accounts. Patreon.com/unfound. You automatically get access to the private Unfound blog, and you get a free ebook with a $2 per month contribution. And the PayPal account, unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. Unfound merchandise, volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4 on Amazon in both paperback and ebook form. If you've bought them, please give them some nice reviews. The playing cards at makeplayingcards.com/sell/Unfound podcast. Shirts for almost all of Unfound's cases at myshopify.com. And please mention Unfound on all true crime Facebook pages and other websites and forums. Thank you. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the daughter of Bobbi Campbell, Stephanie Farrell. Stephanie, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you.
Let's start here. I realized that you were only 5 years old when your mother went missing, but what have you learned about her, maybe from other people, maybe from friends or your grandparents, and what do you remember about her being 5 years old?
I remember a lot about her. I remember we were always together. We were always out doing things. We went to the Hogle Zoo a lot, Liberty Park. We used to go camping and fishing and play Super Nintendo. We were best friends.
And so it sounds to me like, I'm no child expert, but those memories start to form, the ones that we remember maybe all of our lives, 4 or 5 years old. And so your memories are still very vivid.
Yeah, I have very vivid memories about her. I can still remember her laugh and her voice.
Huh. That's really interesting. I suppose you're very lucky that you can do that.
I think so.
Yeah. And maybe what have maybe some of the things you didn't know about her? What have maybe, if you got to know any of her friends as you got older, or maybe your grandparents, anything they could add to your memories?
Yeah, I have been slowly learning who her friends were and reaching out to them and trying to learn more about her and her disappearance. One thing that I did learn about her is that she had a little bit of a drug problem, and then a few months before she went missing, she got into some harder drugs. But one thing that everyone tells me is that she loved me more than anything, and there's no way she would have left me.
Those people who told you about her getting into these harder drugs a few months before she disappeared, could they offer up any explanation for that?
Yeah, a few people that I've talked to said that after she gave birth to my younger brother, she placed him for adoption, and she had a really, really hard time doing that. And it kind of sent her into some depression, and that's when she kind of started using drugs.
Huh. Well, let's talk about, when did you find out that she gave up a son for adoption? Did you know that right when you were 5 years old?
I can't remember that. I found out about him because I was going through my mom's cedar chest and I found pictures of a baby boy, and then I found his adoption papers and everything else.
Wow. And have you contacted him here in the 2000s?
I met my brother about 5 or 6 years ago. I Googled his name and found his parents, and he lives here in Utah.
That's interesting. And does he know that his mother and your mother went missing? Does he know that?
His family was heartbroken when I told him. He wondered his whole life why she wasn't writing him letters anymore, and he's on the same page as I am now. We just need answers.
Wow. Right. And you had told me in a previous conversation, you just mentioned about writing letters, even though your mother gave him up, she kind of kept in contact with his family, I guess.
Right. His adopted parents would write letters to my mom giving updates on how he was health-wise, his growing, and sending pictures of him. And they'd drop him off at the Catholic services, and my mom
Mhm.
would pick him up and drop off letters, and they would do an exchange.
Wow. Any particular reason? Of course, she kept you. Why did she give him up for adoption? If I'm not prying too much, of course.
She didn't have the means to take care of two children. She was
Hmm.
barely getting by with just me, and
Hmm.
she didn't have anybody to help her out. She didn't want to give him up for adoption, but she
Hmm.
felt like it was a better choice for him.
Okay. All right. And I guess the father of this boy went along with that.
Apparently so. I'm not sure who the father is. We still haven't tracked him down.
Don't know who he is. Okay. So you were born first, and then she had your biological brother later.
Correct.
Okay. All right. So she has you, and then at some point she has your younger brother, who she gives up for adoption, and she was writing letters to him, and then she stopped, and they didn't even know what happened back in 1994.
No, they had no idea that she went missing until I met them 5 years ago.
Man, now that you say that, that must have been certainly devastating and a big surprise.
It was. They were shocked. I
Mhm.
called the phone number that I found on the internet, and my brother's father answered. And the first thing he asked me was, "Well, what happened to Bobbi? Where's Bobbi?"
Mhm.
And I broke down and had to tell him the whole story.
Oh my. Oh my. Okay. Wow. Okay. We've talked about adoption on this program before, in the Andre Bowman case, and I think in the Eric Franks case. And once again, adoption comes up in the disappearance of Bobbi Campbell. Okay. It's quite a story, and as the listeners know, I'm adopted as well. Let's move on. Maybe some of the things that were going on in her life. We've already talked about maybe she was getting into some harder drugs in the months before she disappeared. But was she? Did she have a job? Where were you living? What was going on with all of that?
When she went missing, we'd recently moved in with my great grandparents in Draper. I was starting kindergarten, and they had a stable home. She let me pick if I wanted to live with the grandparents on her mom's side or the grandparents on her dad's side, and I picked to go to Draper. And
Okay.
so we moved in and I started kindergarten.
Okay. And how was that? Was that good?
Yeah, it was great. We shared a room. We played games all the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So these weren't your grandparents; they were your great grandparents.
Correct.
So they were maybe a lot older, not just older, but a
Yeah.
lot older. Okay.
My grandparents were in their 60s when my mom went missing.
Okay. And as I've already talked about the facts of this case before we did this interview, she had a job working a staffing place.
Yeah, she worked at SOS Staffing Agency and they sent her to different jobs where they needed more associates and she was doing well from what I know.
Okay. How long do you think that she had been working there?
Probably a few months.
Mm. Of course, the day, we're going to get into this a little deeper in a moment, but that day that she disappeared, she was going to get a check from work. And of course, she never showed up. So she had the job. You were living at your great grandparents', and she also had a boyfriend, and we're not going to use his real name. We're going to call him Tom. Um, what can you tell the listeners a little bit about him, how she met him? Do you have any idea?
She hung around with a bunch of different people, and um, I was left at a friend's house when she went missing. Her name was Jewel,
Mm-hmm.
and this boyfriend, Tom, lived in the same little duplex, triplex that Jewel lived in.
Okay. And do you have
I
any idea?
believe that's how they met.
Okay. So he was living. Did she meet this guy before you moved in with your great grandparents then, or after?
I'm not sure.
Not sure. Okay. How many months would you say that they were a couple before she went missing?
I don't remember any of that.
Okay. And did he have a job? Do you remember anything about him other than that?
I just remember that he had a job, and I remember that I was afraid of him because to me he was a giant,
Hmm.
and I can remember him being abusive towards my mom.
Okay. All right. Not sure how he met, but you remember being afraid of him. And once again, we're not going to use his real name at all for this conversation. You'd mentioned Jewel already, and she plays a part in this disappearance. How did your mother know her? Were they longtime friends? Did they grow up together, or was this somebody just recently in your mother's life?
You know, Jewel was a lot older than my mom. She was old enough to be my mom's mother.
Hmm.
She, the duplex that she lived in, I know that my mom was friends with the next door neighbors. It was a husband and a wife. The husband worked in a pet store. I remember going there with my mom to look at the animals several times. So I think she was friends with that couple, and then maybe that's how she met the next door neighbor, Jewel.
Okay. And once again, just have to remember you were 5 years old. You don't know how long they would have known each other.
Right.
Okay. All right, because she's going to play a part here in a moment. Let's move to the day that she disappeared. Now, most importantly, we want to correct the date that you believe she disappeared, and you are as knowledgeable as anybody is in the public regarding your mother's disappearance. But a lot of places, the listeners are going to find the disappearance date is January 7th, 1995. That's not correct, is it?
No.
Okay. What is a more accurate date for when your mother disappeared?
My family and I remember it being like 2 days after Christmas. So December 27th, 1994.
Okay. Do you have any idea, and I know you've been working on your mother's case for a while, do you have any idea how that got messed up? The difference between, I mean, it's like 10, 11 days. Any ideas how that got messed up?
January 7th was the day that they finally let my grandpa report my mother as a missing person.
Okay. All right. And that's what became the day. Do you think that the police realized then, or even realize now, that that's not the actual date of the disappearance? Actually, the last time anybody who's believable that saw her was like still in 1994. Do you think the police realize that now?
They do realize that now. Back
Okay.
then, we just got the excuses of she's an adult. Adults can do whatever they want. She's not
Sure.
missing.
Right. I hear that a lot. Comes up a lot in all the cases, all types of different cases. Absolutely. So it's just a couple days after Christmas. What do you remember about Christmas that year?
I remember my mom woke me up super early. I want to say around 2 or 3 in the morning because my great grandma usually woke up at 5, and I know it was even earlier than she was used to getting up. She got all of us up and rushed us all to the living room where there were just tons of toys and tons of presents. I have a video of that Christmas, and my mom was using the camcorder, she had to record my reaction to every single present, and she was just so excited for everybody to open their presents.
And you still have that video to this day, don't you?
I do.
Wow. And this video was taken just a couple days before she disappeared.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. Now, moving up once again to December 27th, the actual day of her disappearance, not the day that the police report was filed, but the day that she actually disappeared, as far as we can tell. This is something else that maybe needs to be corrected, is that she didn't disappear. She didn't disappear leaving where you live. She actually disappeared leaving from Jules' house. Explain what went on that day.
I remember my mom did laundry that morning. She put everything into a blue laundry basket. My great grandmother said that she gave her $10 for gas. She put some presents in the car that she was going to give to her friends that weekend. And we were going to go stay with her friend Jewel in Salt Lake for a couple of days.
Okay. Was that unusual to go stay with Jewel for a couple days, or was this a one-off
No,
thing?
we would go and stay with different friends a lot of times. Sometimes we'd camp in friends' backyards. The couple that lived next to Jewel, I remember they had kittens, and I remember sleeping at their house a few times. So it wasn't anything odd. It was something we did sometimes.
Okay. Can you give an approximate location of where you lived, where you and your mother were living with your grandparents, and then maybe an address of where Jewel lived? Because I know they're not near each other.
Right. So we were living in Draper, um, around 123rd South, and my mom drove us to Jewel's house, which was about a block from Liberty Park.
Okay. And so they're really nowhere near each other. You couldn't walk it or anything like that.
No.
No. Okay. So you get to Jules, and what happens next?
I remember we went into Jewel's house, we hung out for a little bit. Jewel gave my mom a little bit of money for groceries. My mom was going to go pick up her paycheck, get groceries for us and Jewel, and then come home.
Just like any other day, do you remember her doing this before, maybe dropping you off with someone when she went to get her check, or would you say that you usually rode with her when
I
she
usually
went?
did not go to the store with her because I was 5 years old and I don't like taking my 5-year-old to the grocery store. So to me, it seems completely normal.
Sure, sure. So she wanted maybe a little mother alone time, possibly, and Jewel was somebody that she trusted with you. And so she thought, well, I'll just go out and have some alone time for a little bit, go get my check, hour or two, and come back.
Right.
Okay. Did you get along with Jewel well? Do you remember getting along with her? Was she a good babysitter?
Yeah, I remember she was really nice, but I thought of her as a grandma.
Okay. Now here's something. This is a discrepancy, and we're going to talk a little bit about this a little bit more later. But when you remember leaving, you remember something different from what eventually went on the police report. Of course, that wasn't filed until 10 or 11 days later. Can you explain the differences, and why do you think that's happened?
I remember my mom leaving with her boyfriend, Tom. I was sitting in the window. I remember watching him walk to the car. The police do not believe that she left with anybody. The police say that she left alone.
Did they, once again, I don't know the rules of which police talk to young children, which you would have been at the time. Did you tell them that at 5 years old? Do you remember talking to the police and telling them that she left with her
I
boyfriend,
never
or
talked to the police.
they never talked to you? Okay, they never talked to you. Then how do you think they got the idea then that she left alone when you remember, of course, you were there, you remember something different? Any ideas?
They claim that they interviewed Jewel and the neighbor and and Tom said that he hadn't seen my mom in about a week.
Do you remember seeing him maybe within a week of your mother disappearing, as you remember it?
No, I remember I had school and then we celebrated Christmas with my great grandparents, and I don't remember seeing him very recent or prior to the last day I saw my mom.
That day. Okay. And we have to remind the listeners is that where did Tom live in relation to Jewel?
Jewel lived in a duplex which had like two side by side homes that were connected, and then
Mm-hmm.
in the back of the home there was kind of an unfinished apartment. It had cement walls. I remember it had a bed and a sink,
Mm-hmm.
but there wasn't much in it. That's where he stayed.
Okay, so he lived essentially, to keep it simple, right next to where Jewel lived.
Correct.
All right, so it wouldn't be totally crazy that your mother goes over there, brings you, and then she did leave with him because he was there. It's very likely, as a matter of fact, possibly.
Right.
Okay. Okay. But once again, is it your then understanding from that day when they eventually did take the report on this that Jewel said that she didn't see Tom that day? That's your understanding then.
That's correct.
Okay. So you and Jewel have a different recollection of that, and I'm going to come back to that a little later. So she leaves, whether with Tom or not with Tom. You're expecting her to come back, and she doesn't come back. What goes on, as you remember, over those next few days?
I remember waking up in the window seat, looking around Jules' apartment for my mom, and she wasn't there. I was scared because my mom wouldn't just leave me without making plans to do so.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't leave any of my clothes or anything with Jewel. They were still in the back of my mom's car. Um, Jewel had a friend come and pick me up and take me to Liberty Park, and we walked around for a couple of hours looking for my mom to see if maybe she was there. Once the friends brought me back to Jewel's home, I ran for the phone and called my great grandparents.
Mm-hmm. And you were the one, not Jewel, but you were the one that had to tell him that your mother never came home.
Right.
What happened next? My understanding is that your great grandparents then started riding around looking for her.
Yeah, my great grandparents came and got me, and then my great grandpa would just drive around every day looking for her. The day that they came and got me, he went straight to the police because it wasn't characteristic of my mom to just leave me without making plans.
Mm-hmm.
When she left for the night, she would leave me with my great grandparents. And so it wasn't like a normal scenario.
Mm-hmm.
My grandpa went to the police station and they said, "You have to wait 72 hours. She's an adult. She'll come home." My grandfather drove around for the next 2 or 3 days looking for her blue car, couldn't find it anywhere, went back to the police. The police again said, "She's still not missing. She's an adult. If we have to find, or if we find her, we don't have to tell you." And they said, "Come back in a week." And he came back a week later, and from what I understand, there was a little bit of a argument that went on. They actually threatened to arrest my great grandfather because he was so upset, but he got them to open a missing persons case.
Okay. So that whole time, once again, between December 27th, 1994, and January 7th, 1995, your great grandparents were looking for your mother, Bobbi. Anybody else riding around? Once again, I know you're 5 years old. Maybe this would have been time off from school. But were there any other adults, private adults, not the police, private adults looking for her?
No, just my grandpa. We have a pretty small family.
Okay. What about Jewel? Did she, in this time, once again, before the police report was filed, did she say anything to you? Did your great grandparents talk to her? What did she say about Bobbi not coming back?
From what my grandparents tell me, Jewel didn't have any idea where my mom could be. She was just upset that she gave my mom money for groceries and she was out that $50. So my grandma gave her $50 to make up for it. but she didn't have any idea of where my mom was.
So your impression was she was more upset about the $50 than your mother disappearing.
Right.
I have to say, Stephanie, that doesn't sound like a very good friend.
Nope, it doesn't.
And
But
especially,
from what I've learned,
please, 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 I'm
from
sorry.
from what I've learned of Jewel, she did have a drug habit, so $50 is $50 she could use for drugs.
Yeah. I guess what I was going to say was that this is a woman that your mother trusted you to stay with, at least for a few hours, at least that day, if not prior times. And then when she goes missing, this woman is more worried about the money. That certainly doesn't make her character look very good, I
Nope.
guess. Okay. And frankly, if she's going to act like that, then I have to question. I'm sure the listeners are saying that, probably thinking, then how can she be believed regarding that day as what she saw and what she didn't see? You know,
Right.
getting back to whether your mother left with Tom or she didn't live with Tom. That certainly damages, in my mind, damages Jules' credibility if she's more worried about money than anything else. But that's just me. Um, in this time after your mother disappeared, did you happen to see Tom anywhere? Did your great grandparents get to talk to Tom?
I have spoken with Tom recently in the past few months and kind of tried to re-question him myself.
Mm-hmm.
He told me that my grandparents did speak with him. He told them that he hadn't seen her in about a week, and
Mm-hmm.
apparently he offered to take me in and take care of me.
Okay. But back then, do you, once again, going back to 1994 and 1995, do you remember him being around? Do you ever remember him helping, even hearing about him helping any searches? Did he go driving around looking for her like your great grandparents did, to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, no.
Okay. All right. So your mother's missing. The police don't want to do anything for at least 10 days. Your great grandfather about gets in a fight with police and trying to get a report filed. What do the police end up doing once they do take this report? And we have to mention that not just Bobbi is missing, but her car is missing, and we'll cover that in a moment. But what did the police do once they got involved? Did they do very much?
From what my grandfather told me, they didn't do anything.
So they filled out the report and just put it in a file somewhere.
Yeah, and I have the report. I have a copy of the original report, and it says notified dispatch. And as far as I know, that's the only thing that happened until the car was found.
And you had told me that at some point in here, although Jewel was worried about her money and everything, she did offer up an explanation for what she thought happened to Bobbi. What did she say?
She thought that my mom just, went out partying, or I
Mm-hmm.
don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
She also told my grandparents that she didn't believe that my mom would have just left me.
Okay. She didn't say something to the effect that she thought Bobbi just took off?
Yeah, she
She
did
said,
say that that could be one possibility.
okay. All right. So now it's early 1995. I'm guessing you're staying with your great grandparents. You don't know where your mother is. You have to, of course, start going back to school, I guess, after Christmas break or whatever. And what goes on that year? Of course, you're thinking a lot about your mother. What was that year of 1995 like?
It was devastating. It was hell. I I wouldn't wish that upon any child. I cried all day long. Anytime anybody said anything to me, I would start crying. I just missed my best friend. And from what I believed when I was little, my mom left me to go with her boyfriend.
Right, because last time you saw her with Tom, even though adults claim otherwise. You remember it a different way.
That's correct.
Okay. In those, and the car eventually was found, but it was a while. But in those months before the car was found, did Tom ever come over to your great grandparents to see how you were doing? Did any of other Bobby's friends come over? Jewel, anybody in those last 8 months ever come over to your great grandparents and offer up any ideas, anything in those
The
months?
only person that came to check on me or to check in with my family was my mom's stepdad. He came and asked if we needed help, if my grandparents wanted him to take me and raise me, but none of her so-called friends or anyone that she hung around came to the house.
Okay. All right. So Tom didn't come by, Jewel didn't come by. They just, as far as you know, and of course, once again, it's been 23 years. You were 5 at the time. You're late 20s now. Um, to your knowledge, once again, these people didn't help out in any way to try to figure out what happened to your mother.
That's correct.
Anything you've heard in the last 20 plus years?
No, I know that they tell me now that they were interviewed by the police, but they
Hmm.
didn't know anything.
Okay. Then, sometime later in 1995, your mother's car was found. Tell the listeners how that happened, and we'll get into some of the details about the state of the car and everything else. How did that all happen?
My mom's car was owned by my great grandpa, and he got a ticket in the mail stating that it was parked in a no parking zone. So he drove to the address on the ticket, and her car was there. It was unlocked. It still had my clothes in the back seat in the laundry basket as well as my mom's. It had her makeup, jewelry. The $10 was in the jockey box or glove compartment,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a weapon under the driver's seat, but she was nowhere to be found.
Okay. When you say weapon, do you know what kind of weapon it was?
I do, but I am not supposed to disclose it.
Okay. But there was something that could be used to hurt another person under the driver's seat.
Correct.
Okay. What is the rough address of where this car was found?
I can't think of it right now. It
Okay.
was near the Jordan River in Salt Lake City, Utah. I want to say it was around 600 West.
Okay. And I know the address is out there, but it was kind of like on a dead end. It wasn't like a regular residential street. It was like on a street that eventually dead ended at the river.
Right.
Okay. What kind of area would you say that where the car was found? What kind of area is it?
It's not a great area. There's high crime in that area. There has been all these years.
Mhm. And is it anywhere near where your great grandparents lived? Is it anywhere near where Jewel lived? Is it anywhere near where she would have been going to get her check the day she disappeared? Anywhere near any of that?
From my understanding, it's not within walking distance
Mm-hmm.
to any of those places. It's about 40 minutes from my grandparents' house and about 15, 20 minutes from Jules' home,
Okay.
and maybe a 5-minute drive to SOS.
Now of course, you've been working on your mother's disappearance, as you stated. You've had some of the paperwork and that concerns her disappearance. Have you ever been told any reason that your mother might have been in that area? Did she possibly know anybody in that general area of Salt Lake City?
From my understanding, the police have told me that they don't know why her car was there. We have had tips come forward that there was a party house about a block away.
Okay. And she might have parked there to go there to this party.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay. Now here's something that not only did the police possibly get the situation wrong with her leaving with her boyfriend or not leaving with her boyfriend, but the police have stated that they believe that that car has been there, was there essentially the whole time. Is that right?
That's right.
But it was in a no parking zone, hence they got the ticket.
Right.
All right. So, um, does it seem? I just have to ask. Does it seem weird to you that a car could sit there for 8 months? Once again, from the late 1994 into like August of 1995, and it takes 8 months for a car to get a parking ticket in a no parking zone.
With the street that the car was parked on, it's not a high traffic area. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's possible. The only reason that makes me feel or think that it's possible is that there was still money in the glove compartment. The clothes were still in the back seat,
Yeah.
pretty much untouched.
And did you say that the car was also unlocked?
Correct.
Were the keys in it?
No,
And the keys have never been found, have they?
that's right.
So the car essentially looked like it would have when she left Jules that day.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Okay. Keys weren't in it. There was a weapon in it. If you don't want to talk about what it was, that's fine. And do you know if the keys were missing, how did they get started and what happened to the car after they discovered it?
My grandpa discovered the car and immediately told the police so that they could come and investigate it. The police told him, "What do you want us to do? It's your car." So my grandfather had it towed back to Draper. He had keys made. It was drivable, from my understanding, and there it sat in our back field. We had 2 acres of property, and he just parked it in the backyard for a little while. He told the police that he had found the weapon. The police said, "What do you want us to do about it? Get rid of it." So he did.
Wow. Huh. I know you can't say what kind of weapon it was, but from what your understanding is and what your grandparents' understanding would be about knowing uh, your mother, were you surprised to hear that there was a weapon in the car? Were they surprised to hear that there was a weapon in the car?
My grandpa was surprised to find a weapon, but thinking back on my mom and the people that she hung around, it's possible it could have been there for her protection.
Okay. I do have to ask you this too. We had talked about this before, but when your great grandfather did get keys made, did the car start right up?
I'm not really sure. I can remember the day that the car came to our house, and I remember sitting in the front yard watching it being towed to our home, but I can't remember if it started right up.
Okay. It'd be interesting to know. No way we'll be able to track down that information now, but I would have to say, if the listeners want to know why I asked that question, being that Salt Lake City does get so cold, and if the car was sitting there from late December 1994 to August or whenever it was in 1995, I would think the battery would be dead, not being used for 8 months, along with the combination of the cold, and of course Salt Lake City gets very hot too. Um, I would think that a battery would need to be charged during that time for the car to be started. But if it started right up, that would lead me to believe that somebody might have been driving it for at least a while, but we just don't know.
Right.
I guess what you're saying also is that the police did no processing of it, no fingerprints, nothing.
Correct.
And then eventually your great grandfather sold it.
He couldn't bear to look at it every day, so he sold it.
I can certainly understand that. Okay. All right, so this car was eventually found 8 months later. Police are going to try to tell us that it was there the whole time. I'm not so sure about that, but let's move on to this. Let's go back to talking about Tom. I just want to reiterate some things. To your knowledge, has he ever said what he was doing on December 27th, 1994?
Not to my knowledge.
And the police did talk to him, though.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so the police talked to him. Did he ever take a polygraph test?
No.
Mm. They maybe ask him to and he refused? Any idea regarding any of that?
I have no idea.
Okay. Now you've told me that he was not an American citizen. He went back to his. Is it true that he went back to his home country? Not maybe within the next 6 months after your mother's disappearance.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay. Do you know if he was here on a green card or any idea how he got into the United States in the first place?
No, I'm not sure why he was here.
So he goes back to his home country. We're not going to say what the country is in case to give away who he is or his identity. And do you know if he's ever come back to the United States since let's say early 1995?
I have no idea.
No idea. So he just moved on with his life as if Bobbi never existed.
It seems like all of her friends did that, yeah.
Okay. All right. So he wasn't much help. Didn't want to do a search. In fact, he claims that he didn't even see Bobbi for at least a week before she disappeared, which seems to me be kind of strange because they were in a relationship. If I may ask, was Tom into drugs as well, like Bobbi was?
I didn't know the answer at the time, but I have come to find out that yes, he was involved in drugs.
Mm. And to your knowledge, once again, he wasn't an American citizen. Do you know if he ever had any charges against him while he was in the United States back then? Ever
I
been?
have learned that he did have drug charges back then.
He did. Okay. Now we've talked about Jewel. We're to believe that she said that Bobbi left on her own. Is that your understanding? Once again, to the best of your knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you try to, once again, remembering that you were 5 years old, did you try to keep in touch with her once you maybe got into your teenage years, or what was your relationship with Jewel after your mother's disappearance?
I never talked to her again. Um, my grandparents kind of kept me away from the people that my mom was around because they weren't very great people. Most of them were involved with drugs.
Mm-hmm.
I had tried doing Google searches in my teens to try to find Jewel, but I didn't have a last name. And then a couple of years ago, I finally found out her last name and I found out that she passed away many years ago.
Like maybe going back to the early 2000s or late 1990s?
I think it was late 1990s.
Oh my. So she can't even be used as a person with information, or not maybe a person of interest, but even somebody, if the police are doing some work on the case these days, they can't even talk to her anymore.
Right.
And do you know how she died?
A drug overdose.
Okay, we have to also remember that you said that Jewel was quite a bit older than your mother, to the point where she was old enough to be Bobbi's mother, maybe 25 years old or something like that.
Right.
Okay. Now, on the public record, at least on Charlie Project and elsewhere, people are going to read about maybe a couple sightings of your mother after she disappeared. Why don't we talk about those? Do you put any credence in them? I'm going to forecast, say, I know you don't, but why not?
The first sighting that the police have on record is my mom had a court date in early January of 95. They claim that she did show up to this court. I don't believe it's true because my grandfather sat outside the courthouse all day waiting to see if she was going to show up to court, and he never saw her. They don't have any signatures of her being there. They can't prove that she was there at all. So
Huh.
the police since do not believe that she was in court that day.
Okay. What was this? This would have been early January, maybe January 4th or something, or what do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know that what that was regarding?
It was a drug charge.
Okay. Do you think if she had been, was it like something serious? Like, could she have done jail time? Or what do you think?
No, from my understanding and what my grandparents told me, it was going to be dismissed.
Okay. So there would be no reason for her to run. Let's say she was maybe facing 5 years in jail. Maybe she was going to try to run off. Was it something like that?
No.
Okay. So this sighting there is not true. Was there also another possible sighting in a park or at a grocery store? Something else that popped up over the years?
Yes. My mom's case was first aired on the news, local news here in Utah when I was 12, so quite a long time after she had been missing.
Mm-hmm.
After that news report, the police received a tip that somebody saw her at Liberty Park the summer after her disappearance. But that tip wasn't called in for many years. So to me, it's not very credible.
I would have to agree with you on that, Stephanie, that the longer somebody calls in a sighting after the sighting actually allegedly occurred, the chances of it being reliable go drastically down. And you start stretching out to 7, 8, 9 years, and it's just almost not believable. And the listeners already know how I feel about sightings in general after the official disappearance date. I don't put a lot of credence in them. So we have a couple of these, but nothing ever came of them.
No.
Okay. Any tips over the years as to what could have happened? Any anonymous tips? Maybe people calling, and maybe not sightings, but anybody calling in any tips to the police, anything like that over the last 23 years, almost 23 years?
The most believable tip that has been called in was recently, 23 years later. A woman called in and said that she was associated with the same group of friends and that she heard my mom overdosed in a group of people and they got scared and they disposed of her body.
Hmm. Well, that does happen. I mean, it's hard. It would be hard to. I didn't know your mother, but what you've told about me, what you've told me, and what you've told the listeners, I suppose that's possible. I mean, drugs, you just never can tell. But we also have to remember, though, that your mother never did get her check that day.
That's right.
Yeah, and it would seem that if she was going to go do drugs with people, she would go get that check, maybe cash it or something. And then if she was going to use some of it, she could have used some of that money for drugs. But it doesn't seem that she did that because she never picked up the check. I also have to wonder, and I have this in my notes here, since Jewel was also into drugs, do you think that she would babysit you while your mother went and did that, or do you think that would have been something that Jewel would have wanted to go along as well? What do you think?
I think that the money that Jewel claims was for groceries was actually for drugs.
See,
So I believe that she asked my mom to go get drugs for her.
okay, that's an interesting insight into that. That's something that I had not considered. Okay, and do you think that Jewel maybe took that secret to her grave? She never told the police that. And you have any insight into that?
I absolutely believe that. I believe that she knew, if she didn't know what happened, she knew more than she told the police, and she took it to her grave.
Okay, and then maybe it is possible, being that that's where your mother's car was, that might have, since you said it's a not the greatest area, maybe it could be that's where she parked her car to go
Right.
get drugs in one of those houses on that block somewhere. And maybe Tom was with her, maybe he wasn't. Very possible. Is that possible, do you think?
I believe it is.
Okay. Now, there's another guy, and we're not going to use his, and this is something that I understand is kind of more recent, which certainly is another, I guess, a twist in this case, is that there is a guy, we're not using his real name, we're going to call him Dan. What can you tell the listeners about him, and when did you find out about him?
So, a few months prior to my mom's disappearance, my mom secretly got married to Dan. My family didn't know about it. All of the friends that she was very close with, when I've, talked to them recently, none of them knew that she got married to Dan. We never lived with him. I don't remember him. My grandparents obtained a copy of the marriage certificate after she went missing.
How did they even find out about this guy?
My mom had mentioned it to a friend or a neighbor, and after she went missing, the neighbor told my grandparents.
And they went about going to and somewhere in your mother's place, or you're living with your great grandparents. Among her paperwork, you found this marriage license,
That's correct.
and you don't remember him at all.
Nope.
Did they get married like justice of the peace, or do you know how that all happened?
It looks like with the paperwork I have, they just got married in the courthouse.
And when did you personally find out about this?
When I was a teenager, my grandfather told me.
Any have you contacted this guy? What did he have to say about? I mean, nobody knew about him. I mean, she had this other guy, Tom. I mean, can you explain? Can you explain that at all?
The police say that Dan said he was in jail at the time of her disappearance. I haven't been able to confirm whether or not that's true. Um, I have been advised not to reach out to him because he does have some charges and he's got a pretty big criminal record.
Okay. So, I mean, were they? I guess they were a couple then. Eh,
I guess so, but nobody knew about it.
that is a stumper. Never lived with them. At least once again, I realize you're just 5 years old. And how many months was this before she disappeared that she got married to this guy?
I don't have the dates
Mm.
offhand, but maybe 8 months before she went missing.
And they never got divorced. It wasn't one of
No,
these like when not to put any joke on this at all, but just to put it in context of like when Britney Spears got married in Las Vegas and like 2 days later they got divorced. It wasn't anything like that. It was like they were still married when she disappeared.
right.
Do you think Tom knew about Dan?
I don't believe so.
Man, that is certainly a stumper, and I'm sure you've been thinking. I mean, once again, you found out as a teenager. You've been thinking about this the whole time.
Right.
Can't make any sense of it at all. I just don't know. Don't know even know how he sounds like a bad guy, but don't even know how your mother knew him. You don't ever remember seeing any pictures of him in your an apartment or anything.
No,
It's like a big secret. Okay, but you say he still is alive.
he is. He no longer lives in Utah, but he is still alive.
Okay, and you do know, even though we're not going to say his real name to the audience, you do know his full real name.
I do.
Okay. Man, that is. Do you personally consider him possibly to? I know what he says he was in jail, but is it possible maybe that he had something to do with your mother's disappearance?
Yeah, I do believe that. There's so many different scenarios that run through my head on a daily basis, but
Mm-hmm.
him being involved goes through my mind a lot.
Okay, so we have Jewel, who wants her $50 after your mother disappears. That's her main concern. We have Tom, who wasn't even an American citizen. He was allegedly your mother's boyfriend. They were hanging out together. Then he goes back to his home country, maybe within the year after your mother disappears. Doesn't sound like he was very helpful, and we don't even know if his words can be believed regarding that time. And then this guy pops up as well, the secret husband.
Right.
And just to be clear about something else, is Dan possibly the father of the brother, the boy that was given up for adoption?
No.
He's not. Okay. And you said you don't even know who that is.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. I do have to ask this, being that you have a father. Is he a suspect in your mother's disappearance at all?
I don't believe my father is. My mom would never tell me or my great grandparents who my father was. I only found out last year my biological father's real name, and he passed away quite a few years ago.
Oh, he did. I'm sorry to hear that, Stephanie. Huh. Okay. Did he live in the Salt Lake City area at the time?
No, he was from Wyoming, where my mom grew up.
Okay. So he could have had an alibi for late 1994 that he was in an entirely different state.
Right.
And do you ever any knowledge whether your mother kept in touch with him, even though you might not have ever met him and didn't know him till recently? Do you think she ever kept in contact with him after
I
you were
don't
born?
think that
Maybe,
he I
please.
don't think that he even knew I existed. I think that she stayed away from him. I have
Okay.
spoken with his two children, and they had no idea that they had a sister, or they didn't remember my mom or anything.
Okay. All right. Now, you have told me recently that the police are still working on this case, even though it's 20 some years old. Unlike a lot of the cases I cover that old, the police haven't worked on it in years. You told me that you've gotten some recent information that they've actually questioned. We'll not go into the specifics, but they've actually questioned some people like within the last year regarding your mother's disappearance.
That's right.
Well, if that's the case, Stephanie, you're certainly doing. I know this has been horrible for you, but if that's the case, you're certainly doing better than most.
Right.
Because I can't tell you how many cases I run into where I know the police, at least to the family's knowledge, have not worked on a case in years, and even cases that are a lot newer than your mother's is. So how did you find out about that? Is that something that you talked to them about, or did they call you up to say that they're working on it? How did you find that out?
I keep I call the detective on my mom's case at least once a month to
Hmm.
check in. Are you working on on her case? What are you doing? I just try to I keep it fresh on their mind in
Yeah.
hopes that they will keep working on it and find out what happened to my mom.
And so in one of those calls, they told you, as a matter of fact, we did do something.
Right.
Well, that had to make you. I know we don't have a solution here yet. It's not resolved, but that had to make you feel good when you heard that.
It did. And I also have a private investigator that has done a lot for my mom's case, and he's questioned people, and he does a really great job.
Okay, good, good. When did this? Of course, it's been 20 some years, and you were 5 at the time. You were a mother now. When did you start kind of heading this up? I'm going to take for granted, are your great grandparents are not with us anymore?
That's correct. They've both passed away.
Okay. So you've been doing this for how long now? Have you been personally, you kind of been heading this up?
I got her case reopened when I was 18, and I've been looking ever since.
So like 10 years now.
Yep.
Okay. You had expressed earlier when you were 5 years old, going into 1995, how that was a horrible year. Mother not being around, you're crying all the time and everything. Um, has any of do those feelings ever subside between late 1994 and now September 2018?
The feelings don't subside. I've just learned through the years how to manage it all. Um, I have days where I wake up from nightmares
Hmm.
of what could have possibly happened. I still break down if something reminds me of my mom. It's still painful every day.
And your great-grandparents raised you? You stayed at their house till you maybe moved out on your own? Is that who brought you up, or what happened after your mother's
Yeah,
disappearance?
my great grandparents raised me. I lived with them until I was 18 and I moved out on my own. I was very close with them. They they were my parents because they raised me from the time I was 5.
Hmm. And then since then, they've both passed away.
Right. My grandfather, on the last day he was with us, he didn't know who I was. He didn't know who his wife was. He didn't know who anyone was. But when I went into the room, he looked me in the eye and said, "Where's Bobbi? What happened to Bobbi?"
Oh my.
And the only thing I could tell him is she went to work because I didn't want to have him relive everything all over again.
Right. Right. Wow. Okay. Um, do you have a Facebook page or website or anything set up for your mother's disappearance, Stephanie?
I have a Facebook page. It's Missing Bobbi Ann Campbell, and I also have an email set up that's missingbobbianncampbell@gmail.com.
Okay. Do you think that losing your mother early in your life, at 5 years old, her going disappearing, and I know you're a mother now, do you think that's affected how you are a mother now, and I don't know how many children you have, none of my business, but has it affected how you're a mother, do you think?
It absolutely has. My children are my whole world. I have 2 amazing little kids. My son is the same age I was when I lost my mom. So it's a little bit hard to look at him and know how I felt at that age, and I can't imagine a child going through what I went through. But I'm super protective of them. I just
Right.
always want to be here for them.
Hmm. And do you think that finding out about your mother's, once again, struggle with drugs, getting into harder drugs, maybe that had something to do with the disappearance? We don't know. I mean, has that affected your attitude toward that as well?
Yeah, I would never do anything to make it so that I couldn't be here for my kids.
Stephanie, any last words before we complete this interview?
Just if anybody has any information, whether you feel like it's helpful or not, a memory, anything, please reach out and call the police. You can remain anonymous, send an email to that email address. I just need to find my mom.
Okay. And I am not sure if you are a member of the Unfound Discussion Group, which is a private group on Facebook. I'm not sure if you're in there or not. I will surely get you in there if you're not, but we do make it possible that listeners can contact you. And I know that they've been very helpful in many of the other cases that Unfound has covered, with information, with, insight on, in particular, this is the second disappearance I've covered in Salt Lake City. So I know that I already have many Salt Lake City listeners already. So, I'm always hoping, somebody might know something, be able to come forward after all these years. And um, maybe the listeners don't know, but I'm very familiar with Salt Lake City because I had 2 brothers that lived there for quite a while. It's a big city, but it seems to me it's a very small city too. It seems like a lot of people do know each other. So I can only hope that some of the Salt Lake City listeners will be able to help you out, and we'll make it easy for them to contact you.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay. And Stephanie, I appreciate you joining me and the listeners on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And that was my interview with Stephanie Farrell, daughter of Bobbi Campbell. I thank her for joining me and all of you on this episode. So many variables in this disappearance. Did Bobbi leave with Tom or didn't she? How was she married to someone nobody knew about? Was the car parked on that street for just a couple days or for 8 months? If Jewel was trustworthy enough to watch Stephanie,
then why did it seem to Stephanie that Jewel was only worried about her $50? I'm not sure how we can decipher all of that 23 years later and come to an accurate conclusion as to what happened to Bobbi. The truth is that almost anything could have happened to her. An overdose, Tom did something to her, Dan, if he was out of jail, could have hurt her. She could have run into some other guy who nobody knew about that did something to Bobbi. All I can say for sure is I believe Stephanie and that Bobbi didn't run off and leave her daughter behind. I'm pretty sure about that. If for no other reason than if Bobbi was going to run away, she would have gotten her paycheck first. What Stephanie and I only talked about in passing, though, was the court date Bobbi had. If I heard Stephanie right, Bobbi disappeared about a week before it. Granted, Stephanie doesn't believe Bobbi was going to do any time. She said her mother's charges were going to be dismissed. But I can't help but think that someone might have been nervous about her showing up in court on drug charges. Was somebody afraid that the name of a person who sold Bobbi those drugs might pop up? Remember, Tom had drug charges against him. Was he worried about going to jail? Or was the secret husband Dan worried? Because he was shady as well. In fact, did he and Bobbi get married so she couldn't testify against him in court at some point? That has crossed my mind. The good news is that there are things going on in this case 20-some years later. The investigators haven't forgotten about Bobbi. They just talked to Tom again recently. That's better than most cases get after being this old. And that will keep the public from leaving Bobbi and her disappearance behind. With that, I'll leave the theorizing up to you. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Dentzel, and you've been listening to Unfound.